The first sound was the splintering of wood. Emma Caldwell jolted awake from the hard cot in her small bedroom, heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, the Arizona night was supposed to be silent, a vast, velvet blackness, broken only by the cry of a distant coyote or the rustle of the wind through brittle mesquite. But this was not the wind. This was the thud of heavy boots on the porch, the guttural bark of a foreign tongue, and the shattering of the kitchen window. She was alone. Her father and 3 brothers had ridden out 2 days prior, heading north toward the Superstition Mountains, their saddlebags filled with provisions she had packed, and their minds filled with the promise of the $5,000 bounty on the Apache warrior they called the Shadow of Death. They wouldn't be back for a week. Joshua Parker, their neighbor, wasn't due to check on her until tomorrow. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Scrambling from the bed, Emma grabbed the Winchester her father insisted she keep loaded beside her. Her hands, usually steady as she kneaded dough or stitched leather, trembled only for a second before discipline took over. She moved silently through the small dark house, her bare feet making no sound on the rough-hewn floorboards. Through a crack in the sitting room curtains, she saw them 5 riders, their faces obscured by low-brimmed sombreros, their silhouettes menacing against the pale wash of moonlight. Bandits. A boot crashed against the front door, the wood groaning in protest. Emma flattened herself against the wall, her mind racing. The main door was barred, but it wouldn't hold for long. She had maybe a minute. Her gaze fell on the small, intricately carved box on the mantel, her mother's keepsake box. Inside lay the few precious things she owned: her mother's wedding band, a dried desert rose, and a silver locket on a delicate chain. The door splintered, the bar cracking under the assault. There was no time. Ignoring everything else, Emma snatched the locket from the box and fastened it around her neck, the cool metal, a familiar comfort against her skin. It was the only thing she had left of her mother, a tangible piece of a love she barely remembered. They could take the house, the horses, the food. They would not take this. The door burst inward with a deafening crash. 2 men spilled into the room, their pistols glinting. Emma didn't hesitate. She brought the Winchester to her shoulder and fired. The roar of the rifle in the enclosed space was colossal, and the first man crumpled with a cry of shock, clutching his leg. The second dove for cover behind the overturned dining table, firing blindly in her direction. Splinters exploded from the wall near her head. She retreated into the dark hallway, chambering another round. She knew the layout of this house better than the lines on her own palm. They did not. It was her only advantage. She could hear them shouting to each other in Spanish, their voices a mix of anger and surprise. They had expected a lone, helpless woman, not a phantom who shot with deadly accuracy from the shadows. For nearly an hour, the house became a battlefield. Emma moved from room to room, using the darkness as her shield, her shots precise and punishing. She wounded another man who tried to climb through a broken window, his scream swallowed by the vast desert night. But they were relentless. They knew she was trapped, her ammunition finite. The end came when the leader, a burly man with a cruel scar across his cheek, finally cornered her in the kitchen. He had circled around the back while his men kept her pinned. Emma fired her last bullet from the Winchester just as he burst through the pantry door. The shot went wide, and the rifle was useless, an empty stick in her hands. He lunged his powerful frame, easily overpowering her. Such fire, little bird. He snarled, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey as he twisted the rifle from her grasp. It will be a shame to break you. His men swarmed into the room, their faces triumphant. While 2 of them bound her wrists with rough rope, the leader's eyes caught the glint of silver at her neck. He reached for it, his dirty fingers closing around the locket. No, Emma screamed, a primal sound of pure desperation. She thrashed wildly, kicking and biting with the ferocity of a cornered animal. It was not just a piece of jewelry. It was her mother's soul, her own past, the last anchor to who she was. The leader laughed, a harsh grating sound. So the little bird has a treasure. He tightened his grip, the chain cutting into her skin. Suddenly, the man holding her left arm went rigid. A soft, wet sound, and he slumped to the floor, an arrow protruding from his throat. Before the others could react, another arrow found its mark, silencing the man holding her other arm. The room descended into chaos. The bandits spun around, firing their pistols into the darkness outside the shattered windows, but they were shooting at ghosts. A third bandit fell, clutching a knife that had appeared in his chest as if from nowhere. The leader stared in horror, his grip on Emma's locket forgotten. He pushed her away, raising his pistol, his eyes wide with a terror that surpassed any fear she had shown. A figure materialized in the doorway, so silent and swift, he seemed to be woven from the moonlight and shadows themselves. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his movements fluid and economical. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt, his long black hair tied back from a face of sharp, unforgiving angles. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. She had studied it 100 times on the weathered bounty poster. Kai, the shadow of death. The bandit leader fired the shot deafeningly loud. But Kai was no longer there. He moved with impossible speed, a blur of motion that ended with him behind the bandit, a long knife held to the man's throat. The bandit dropped his pistol with a clatter. Kai said nothing. There was a sickeningly final sound, and the leader collapsed, his lifeblood staining the floorboards Emma had scrubbed just that morning. Silence. The only sound was Emma's own ragged breathing. Kai stood over the last dead man, his chest rising and falling evenly. He turned his head, and his dark, intelligent eyes met hers. There was no triumph in his gaze, only a calm, unnerving assessment. He had just killed 4 men in less than a minute, and he looked as serene as if he had been watching the sunrise. He was everything the stories said he was, and yet standing there in the wreckage of her home, she felt no fear of him. He had saved her. He had saved her mother's locket. The next morning, the sun rose on a scene of devastation. Emma moved through the house in a daze, stepping over debris and bloodstains. Kai had disappeared as silently as he had arrived, leaving her with the dead and the dawn. She had spent the rest of the night dragging the bodies outside her mind, numb her body screaming with exhaustion and bruises. The sound of hoofbeats sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through her. She grabbed the rifle, reloading it with cartridges from the supply tin, her hands steady now. But as the riders drew closer, she recognized the familiar gait of her father's gray gelding. Her family was back. Robert Caldwell swung down from his horse before it had fully stopped, his weathered face a mask of shock as he took in the scene, the shattered windows, the splintered door, the dark stains on the porch. Emma. Her brothers James Thomas and William were right behind him, their faces paling as they saw the bodies she had lined up near the barn. What in God's name happened here? Robert demanded, his hands gripping her shoulders, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Bandits, she said, her voice hoarse. 5 of them. Thomas whistled, his gaze moving from the bodies to Emma's small frame. You did this? Most of it, she admitted, deciding in an instant to omit Kai's involvement. How could she explain it? How could she tell them that the man they were hunting had saved her life? They would never believe it. They would assume it was a trick, a trap. They thought I was an easy target. Robert's face hardened, his relief warring with a cold fury. We should have never left you alone. He turned to his eldest son. James, you and Thomas ride to town. Inform the sheriff. William, help your sister. As the two eldest rode off, William approached her, his expression filled with a quiet concern that was so different from the brash confidence of his brothers. "Are you all right, Emma, truly?" "I will be," she said, managing a weak smile. He was the only one who seemed to see past the survivor to the shaken young woman beneath. Later that afternoon, Joshua Parker arrived. He was handsome in the way of wealthy men, with a confident smile and eyes that always seemed to be calculating. He dismounted from his pristine black stallion, his face a perfect picture of distress. "Emma, my dear girl, your father sent word. I came as fast as I could. To think what might have happened." He took her hands in his grip a little too tight. "If I had only come to check on you a day sooner." "I managed," Joshua, Emma said, pulling her hands away gently. His presence always made her skin crawl, a feeling she could never quite explain. It was the way he looked at her, as if she were a prize mare he was considering adding to his stable. "Of course you did," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You Caldwells are made of stronger stuff than most. Still, this territory is growing more dangerous by the day. A woman shouldn't be left to fend for herself." He glanced toward her father, who was supervising the grim task of burying the bandits. "Perhaps it's time your father considered an arrangement that would ensure your protection permanently." The implication was clear. Emma felt a hot flush of anger. He was using this tragedy to press his suit. "I'm quite capable of protecting myself, as you can see." Parker's smile tightened. "Of course. A momentary lapse in judgment. Forgive me." He made a show of inspecting the damage, his brow furrowed with concern. But Emma noticed his gaze linger on the tracks around the barn tracks that didn't belong to the bandits' shod horses or her family's mounts. They were the faint prints of an unshod pony, Kai's horse. Parker's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second before his charming mask slipped back into place. He knew, or at least he suspected. The sheriff arrived with James and Thomas, a portly, self-important man who asked a few cursory questions, declared Emma a hero, and concluded that the bandits were a known gang from Sonora. The matter, as far as the law was concerned, was closed. But for the Caldwells, it was far from over. The attack had laid bare their vulnerability. Their small ranch felt less like a home and more like a fragile outpost on the edge of a violent, lawless world. "This is why we need that bounty," Thomas declared that evening, slamming his fist on the repaired dining table. $5,000 would get us out of this dust bowl. We could buy a place in California, somewhere civilized, somewhere Emma would be safe. We were close. James said, his voice low and frustrated. "We found his trail near Apache Junction, but it vanished. It's like the man himself just smoke." Robert Caldwell was quiet, his eyes fixed on the wanted poster of Kai that was still tacked to the wall. The attack on his daughter had rekindled his obsession, transforming it from a financial necessity into a personal crusade. To him, all the territory's dangers now had a single face, and it was Kai's. "He's the source of this trouble." Robert said, his voice a low growl. "His raids stir up the hornet's nest. His defiance emboldens every renegade and bandit from here to the border. We take him down, we bring a measure of peace back to this land. And we get the money to start over." Emma listened in silence, the locket cool against her skin. They were talking about the man who had saved her, painting him as the monster he had protected her from. A knot of guilt and confusion tightened in her chest. She had survived, but in doing so, she had become a keeper of secrets, a silent dissenter in her own family. And as she watched her father's eyes burn with a cold, righteous fire, she knew that their hunt for the shadow of death was about to become more relentless than ever. 3 nights later, the smell of smoke woke her again. This time, it wasn't the contained scent of a campfire, but the acrid, choking stench of a ravenous blaze. Emma threw open her bedroom door to a wall of heat and a terrifying orange glow. The front of the house was engulfed in flames. "Father James," she screamed, her voice lost in the roar. Panic seized her as she realized her family wasn't there. Her father and brothers had ridden out at dusk, chasing a fresh rumor of Kai's whereabouts near Tortilla Flat. She was alone again. The fire moved with unnatural speed, consuming the dry timbers of the old house. The main room was an inferno, cutting off her escape through the front. Choking on the thick smoke, she ran to the back, her lungs burning. The back door was already blocked by a curtain of fire. Trapped. Despair washed over her. Through the smoke-filled kitchen, she could see the flames licking at the frame of the window she'd stood before just nights ago, fighting for her life. Now it was her only way out. She grabbed a half-full water bucket and doused her shawl, wrapping it around her head and face, before picking up a heavy cast-iron skillet. With a desperate cry, she smashed it against the window pane. Glass shattered, and she scrambled through the opening, cutting her hands and arms on the jagged edges, not even feeling the pain. She landed in a heap outside, gasping for clean, cool air. The entire ranch was ablaze. The barn, the chicken coop, the very fences that marked their land, all were being devoured by fire. This was no accident. Someone had done this deliberately, efficiently. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind, dragging her back into the shadows of the cottonwood trees at the edge of the property. Emma struggled, but the grip was like iron. "Be still," a low voice commanded in her ear. She froze. She knew that voice. Kai. He released her, and she spun around to face him. In the flickering firelight, his face was grim. "They came back," he said, his eyes scanning the burning homestead. "Parker's men. Not the Mexicans this time. White men." "Parker," Emma whispered, her mind reeling. But why? They were not here to steal. They were here to finish the job, Kai stated simply. To make sure there were no witnesses left from the first attack. He looked from the fire to her. "Now everyone will believe you died in the flames. Your family, the Sheriff Parker himself. It is the only thing that will keep you safe." The truth of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her home was gone. Her life as she knew it was over. To the world, Emma Caldwell was dead, burned to ashes with her family's ranch. "My family," she stammered. "They'll come back to nothing." "They will come back to grief," Kai corrected, his tone not unkind. "But they will be alive. If Parker believed you survived, he would have them hunted down as well." A lone rider appeared on the ridge, overlooking the valley of fire, sitting motionless on his horse, watching the destruction. Even from this distance, Emma recognized the silhouette of the rider and his mount. Joshua Parker. He was watching his handiwork, ensuring the task was complete. A cold, visceral hatred filled her, eclipsing her grief. "We must go," Kai said, pulling her deeper into the shadows, "before he sends his men to search the ashes." He led her to where his paint stallion was hidden in a dry arroyo. With her home, a raging funeral pyre behind her, and the man responsible for it all watching from a ridge, Emma made the only choice she had left. She swung up behind Kai on his horse, her hands clutching his waist. She was leaving everything she had ever known, casting her lot with the most wanted man in Arizona. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a ghost, and her only guide in the land of the dead was the shadow of death himself. They rode for 2 days, pushing deeper into the unforgiving wilderness that was Kai's domain. The landscape shifted from the familiar scrub of the valley to a labyrinth of red rock canyons and towering saguaros that stood like silent sentinels. For Emma, who had never ventured more than a day's ride from her home, it was like entering another world. The journey was brutal. The sun was a relentless hammer, and water was a currency more precious than gold. Yet Kai moved through it all with an effortless certainty, reading the land like a book, written in a language only he understood. He knew where to find hidden springs, which plants were edible, and how to travel without leaving a trail a child could follow. But they were not alone. On the third morning, as they rested in the shade of a rock overhang, Kai suddenly stiffened. He put a finger to his lips, his head cocked, listening to something Emma couldn't hear. "Bounty hunters," he whispered, his eyes hardening. "Not your family. These are professionals, hired guns." He had seen their sign an hour earlier, a broken branch, a scuffed rock, subtle clues that told him they were being tracked by men who knew their craft. Now he could hear the faint jingle of their spurs carried on the morning breeze. How Emma breathed, her heart beginning to pound. "Parker," Kai said grimly. "He must have found tracks near the ranch after all. He knows you escaped with me. The fire wasn't enough. Now he wants us both dead, and he's hired the best men money can buy." There was no time to talk. They were on the move in seconds, leaving their small camp behind. The chase was relentless. The bounty hunters were skilled and tenacious, pushing them harder, giving them no time to rest. They were forced to abandon their planned route, veering into a treacherous stretch of badlands known as the Devil's Jawbone. It was during a desperate gallop through a narrow rock-strewn wash that Kai's stallion stumbled. The horse recovered, but Kai was thrown hard against the canyon wall. He was back in the saddle in an instant, his face a stony mask. But Emma saw him wince, saw the way he favored his left side. That evening, they finally found a temporary sanctuary in a shallow cave, hidden behind a curtain of desert willow. They had shaken their pursuers for now, but both knew it was only a temporary reprieve. As Kai slid from his horse, he swayed his hand, going to his side. "You're hurt," Emma said, rushing to him. "It is nothing." "Let me see," she insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. He hesitated, then reluctantly lifted his shirt. A dark, ugly bruise was spreading across his ribs, and a jagged gash, slick with blood, ran along his side, where he'd struck the rock. It was deep. "This is more than nothing," she said, her healer's instincts taking over. She gently probed the area around the wound. "You may have broken a rib." She set to work using the last of their clean water to wash the gash. From the small medical kit she'd managed to salvage from her saddlebag, she took out a needle and gut thread. Her mother had taught her how to stitch a wound, practicing on cuts of leather. She had never worked on human flesh. "This will hurt," she warned, her voice steadier than she felt. Kai merely nodded, his jaw set, as he braced himself against the cave wall. As she worked, her fingers deft and sure, a strange intimacy settled between them. In the flickering light of their tiny smokeless fire, she was acutely aware of the warmth of his skin, the strength in the muscles that tensed under her touch. He bore the pain without a sound, his dark eyes watching her, not with suspicion, but with a quiet, startling trust. She finished by applying a poultice of crushed leaves he had pointed out to her earlier, a plant the Apache used to ward off infection, and binding his ribs tightly with strips torn from her petticoat. "Thank you," he said when she was done, his voice a low rumble. "You have a healer's hands." "My mother taught me," she replied softly, packing away her supplies. "She would be proud." His words, simple and direct, touched her more deeply than any flowery compliment ever had. She looked at him, truly, looked at him not as a mythical warrior or wanted fugitive, but as a man who was injured, who was tired, but who was still determined to protect her. In that moment, the last vestiges of the world she had known fell away. Her family, her home, her past, they were all distant echoes. All that was real was this cave, this fire, and this man who had inexplicably bound his fate to hers. Their shared vulnerability had forged a bond stronger than steel, a silent partnership born of fire and blood. With Kai injured, their pace slowed. The bounty hunters closed the distance. The pursuit that had been a grim cat-and-mouse game was about to become a final deadly confrontation. Knowing they could not outrun their pursuers any longer, Kai led them toward a place he called the Valley of Whispering Wind, a hidden Apache stronghold where his people had taken refuge. "It is our last hope," he told her, his breathing shallow. "But getting there will not be easy. The only entrance is through a narrow pass. They will try to trap us there." They arrived at the foothills of the mountains that sheltered the valley as dusk began to fall. The entrance to the pass was a dark slash in the rock face, a perfect place for an ambush. As they approached, Kai held up a hand, bringing them to a halt. "They are waiting," he said, his voice barely audible. Emma scanned the rocks, her eyes straining in the fading light. She saw nothing, but she trusted his instincts. "What do we do?" For a long moment, Kai was silent, his mind working. "There is another way," he said finally. "A goat trail high on the ridge. It is dangerous, treacherous in the dark. But they will not expect it." The climb was terrifying. The trail was barely a foot wide in places, with a sheer drop on one side that fell away into blackness. Emma's horse Willow shied nervously, her hooves sending pebbles skittering into the abyss. Emma dismounted, leading the mare by the reins, her heart in her throat with every step. Kai followed, leading his own mount, his injured side, making every movement an agony. Hours crept by. They were halfway up the ridge when a rifle shot cracked through the night air, echoing off the canyon walls. A bullet ricocheted off the rock face just above Emma's head. They had been spotted. "Go," Kai yelled, shoving her forward. "Get the horses to that outcrop. I will hold them off." He unslung his own rifle, turning to face the direction of the shot. Another shot rang out, and Emma heard Kai grunt in pain as he stumbled, dropping to one knee. "Kai," she screamed, turning back. "Go, Emma, now," he commanded, firing his rifle into the darkness below. Torn between obedience and a desperate need to help him, Emma hesitated. Then her training, her pragmatism took over. He couldn't hold them off if she was a target. She scrambled forward, pulling the panicked horses behind her until they reached the relative safety of a small flat ledge. Securing the reins, she pulled her own rifle from its scabbard and crept back to the edge of the outcrop. Below, she could see the muzzle flashes of at least 3 rifles. The bounty hunters were climbing after them, using the darkness for cover. Kai was pinned down behind a small cluster of rocks, firing sparingly, making every shot count. But he was wounded, outnumbered, and a static target. A plan began to form in Emma's mind, born of desperation and a deep, intuitive understanding of the land she had grown up in. She had noticed on the climb that the rocks above the trail were loose, a scree slope held in place by a few precariously balanced boulders. She whispered her idea to Kai during a lull in the shooting. He looked at her, his eyes shining with a mixture of pain and admiration in the moonlight. "It is too risky." "It's our only chance," she countered. "Keep them busy." Without waiting for his agreement, she began to climb, moving away from the trail up the steep, unstable rock face. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, found purchase in tiny cracks. Her boots slipped on the loose gravel. It was a slow, agonizing process. Twice she nearly felt her life hanging by a thread. But the image of Kai, alone and wounded, spurred her on. Finally, she reached the key point, a large, teetering boulder that acted as the linchpin for the entire scree slope. Below her, she could see the bounty hunters advancing, moving from cover to cover, getting closer to Kai's position. Using her rifle stock as a lever, she put all her weight against the boulder. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the rock shifted. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The single boulder dislodged others, and the entire hillside gave way in a deafening roar. A river of rock and gravel poured down the slope, a man-made avalanche that swept over the trail below. Emma heard terrified shouts cut short as the rockslide engulfed the bounty hunters. When the dust settled, there was only silence. Shaking, she scrambled back down to Kai. He was leaning against the rocks, his face pale, a fresh blood stain spreading on his sleeve. He had been shot in the arm. "You did it," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. "We did it," she corrected, already tearing another strip from her dwindling petticoat to make a bandage. They made their way to the hidden valley, supporting each other. As they passed through the narrow entrance and the valley opened up before them, a green secret paradise of willow trees and a sparkling stream. Emma knew she had crossed a final threshold. She had saved the man who had saved her, and in the process had discovered a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. The people of the valley emerged from their wiki-ups, their faces etched with concern as they saw their wounded leader. An elderly woman with a face as wrinkled and wise as the ancient landscape itself stepped forward. "My grandson," she said, her eyes finding Emma. "You have brought him home." In the safety of the Apache camp, Emma finally let her guard down. Surrounded by the quiet dignity of Kai's people, she learned their ways, their language, their stories. And as she nursed Kai back to health, their bond deepened into something more profound than partnership. She was no longer a ghost or fugitive. Here in this hidden corner of the world, she was simply Emma. Meanwhile, 100 miles away, her youngest brother William was growing suspicious. Joshua Parker's story of the attack on the ranch had inconsistencies. The bandits Parker had helped the sheriff track down and kill claimed they knew nothing of a second attack or a fire. Driven by a nagging unease, William began his own quiet investigation. He rode out to the ruins of the ranch, sifting through the ashes. There, half buried in the dirt near the barn, he found a silver coat button, ornate and expensive, identical to the ones on a coat Joshua Parker favored. It was a small thing, but it was enough. The seed of a terrible truth had been planted. William Caldwell, the quiet, observant one, was about to uncover a secret that would shatter his family's world and expose a vendetta decades in the making. William held the silver button in the palm of his hand and the metal cool against his skin. It was a small, insignificant object, yet it felt as heavy as a tombstone. He had spent weeks piecing together a puzzle he didn't want to solve. He'd spoken to traders in Prescott ranch hands near the border and a disgruntled former employee of Joshua Parker's. Each conversation added another piece, and the picture that emerged was monstrous. He found his father and brothers at their new temporary camp, a line cabin they were using while they planned to rebuild. Robert Caldwell was cleaning his rifle, his movements still driven by a grief that had hardened into a quiet, simmering rage. "Parker lied to us," William said, his voice flat. James looked up from the harness he was mending. "What are you talking about?" "The fire. The second attack. It wasn't bandits." William opened his hand, showing them the button. This was near the barn. "It's from Parker's riding coat." Thomas snorted in disbelief. "A button? That's your proof? He probably lost it when he came to help after." "He wasn't helping," William insisted, his voice rising with conviction. "He set the fire. He hired the men. He wanted everyone to think Emma was dead." He took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the final devastating blow. "And it's not about land or cattle. It's about revenge." He told them the story he had painstakingly uncovered from an old land registrar in Prescott. 20 years ago, long before the Caldwells had settled in their valley, a homesteader named Abraham Parker had owned a large, prosperous ranch in the same area. During a period of intense conflict, a posse had been formed to hunt down a band of Apache raiders who had attacked a freight wagon. The posse, led by a young, ambitious Robert Caldwell, had tracked the raiders to the Parker homestead. In the confusion of a moonless night, they had mistaken the ranch for the raiders' camp. There was a firefight. William set his eyes fixed on his father's paling face. Abraham Parker came out onto his porch unarmed, trying to tell them who he was. Someone in the posse fired. He was killed instantly. His wife died of grief a year later, and his son, a boy named Joshua, was sent to live with relatives back east. His family ruined his name, disgraced. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Robert Caldwell looked as if he had been turned to stone, the rifle slipping from his hands. We thought they were the raiders," he whispered the words, tasting like ash. The tracks led right to their door. Joshua came back 5 years ago. William continued, his voice relentless. He used an inheritance to buy the ranch next to ours. He's been waiting all this time. The bounty on Kai was the perfect opportunity. It got us out of the way, left Emma alone. The first attack was to terrorize her, to make her his victim so he could play the hero. When that didn't work, when she fought back, he decided to erase her to make you suffer the way he did, by losing everything you love in a fire. The revelation reshaped their entire world. The man they had considered a friend, a potential son-in-law, was a monster of their own making. Their righteous hunt, their frontier justice, had been built on a foundation of tragic error and innocent blood. He's hunting her now. Robert said, his voice a choked rasp, as the final pieces clicked into place. He knows she's with Kai. He's been telling everyone she was kidnapped, brainwashed. He's playing the part of the grieving suitor, leading posses, trying to rescue her. He's trying to kill her. James corrected, his face a grim mask. And Kai? He can't have any witnesses left. The Caldwells, who had ridden out so many times to hunt a man for a crime he may not have committed now, had a new target. This time the hunt was not for money or misplaced justice. It was for redemption. It was for Emma. The fragile peace of the Valley of Whispering Wind was shattered by the arrival of a lone Apache scout, his horse lathered in sweat. He brought news that a large party of riders led by Joshua Parker and the Caldwells was approaching the mountains. The news ripped through Emma like a physical blow. Her family. They were coming, but they were coming with the man who had tried to kill her. Parker had twisted the truth, manipulated their grief, and turned her own father and brothers into instruments of his revenge. They believe they are rescuing you. Kai said, his face grim as he listened to the scout's report. They will not listen to reason. A council of elders convened. The warriors prepared for a fight. The valley, which had been a sanctuary, was about to become a fortress. Emma's heart was torn in two. The people who had taken her in were preparing to fight the family she loved. Whatever the outcome, she would lose. There has to be another way, she pleaded with Kai. If I could just talk to them. They will see you standing with me and shoot first, he stated bluntly. To them, I am the devil who has stolen their sister's soul. But Emma saw a flicker of an idea in his eyes. A desperate, dangerous gambit. There is a place, he said slowly. A canyon north of here. The elders call it the Place of Echoes. It is a box canyon, one way and one way out. If we can lure Parker there away from the valley, we can trap him. But your family will be with him. Then we have to separate them, Emma insisted. William, my youngest brother. He is not like the others. He thinks he observes. If I can get a message to him, he might listen. The plan was set into motion. An Apache youth who could move through the mountains like the wind was sent with a message for William, a simple token only he would recognize. A pressed desert marigold, a flower Emma used to leave in his books as a child. The message instructed him to light a fire on a specific ridge at midnight if he was willing to talk. That night, Emma and Kai waited on a high peak overlooking the designated ridge, their hearts in their throats. The hours crawled by. Just as despair began to set in, a tiny pinprick of light flickered to life in the distance. William had come. The meeting was tense. William arrived alone, his face etched with worry and suspicion. Emma stepped out of the shadows, and the relief that washed over him was so profound it was painful to watch. "Emma, you're alive. You're all right." "I'm all right, Will," she said softly. She told him everything. About the attack, about Kai saving her, about Parker's deception. She watched his face as he listened, saw the doubt in his eyes, war with his trust in her. "Parker told us," he began. "Parker is a liar," Emma cut in fiercely. "He's the one who burned our home, Will. He wants me dead. He wants all of us to suffer." It was Kai's quiet appearance from the darkness that sealed it. William tensed his hand, going to his pistol, but Emma stepped in front of him. "This is Kai. He has protected me. He is a good man." Kai met William's gaze, his own expression calm and steady. He spoke of the button William had found, adding details only someone who had been watching Parker's men could know. He spoke of Parker's motivations, not with hatred, but with a quiet, sad understanding of the cycle of violence. Slowly, William's suspicion began to crumble, replaced by the horrifying weight of the truth. "Father, he won't believe this. He's so consumed by—" "Then you have to make him believe," Emma urged, her hands gripping her brother's arms. "You have to create a distraction, lead Parker and his men into the canyon. We'll be waiting. It's the only way to end this without a bloodbath." William looked from his sister's desperate face to the dignified Apache warrior beside her. He was being asked to betray his father to save his family. It was an impossible choice. But looking into Emma's clear, determined eyes, he knew it was the only choice he could make. "I'll do it," he said, his voice heavy. "God help us all." A fragile, desperate truce had been forged. The stage was set for a final confrontation in the Place of Echoes, a battle not just for survival, but for the soul of the Caldwell family itself. The sky above the Place of Echoes was the color of a fresh bruise, heavy with unshed rain. Thunder grumbled in the distance, a low, menacing counterpoint to the tension that crackled in the air. Emma crouched beside Kai behind a cluster of boulders overlooking the narrow entrance to the box canyon. Below, a dozen Apache warriors were hidden amongst the rocks, their faces grim, their bows and rifles ready. "They are coming," Kai said, his voice a low whisper. Emma could see them now, a column of riders picking their way through the rocky terrain. Joshua Parker rode at the front, his face a mask of righteous determination. Beside him rode her father and her brothers, James and Thomas. And behind them, a dozen of Parker's hired guns. William, true to his word, was lagging at the rear, creating the pretense of a lame horse, his role to block the entrance once the trap was sprung. As the riders entered the canyon, the first fat drops of rain began to fall. The storm was breaking. The trap was simple. William would start a rock slide, sealing the canyon mouth. The warriors would reveal themselves, their superior numbers and position forcing a surrender. It was designed to avoid bloodshed. But Parker was no fool. As he reached the center of the canyon, he reined in his horse, his eyes scanning the cliffs. A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Something's not right," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden stillness before the deluge. "It's too quiet." At that moment, the rumble of William's rock slide began. But it was too soon. Parker spun his horse around his eyes, locking on William's position. Treachery, He roared. The canyon exploded into chaos. Parker's men opened fire on the cliffs. The Apache warriors returned fire, the air filled with the crack of rifles and the whistle of arrows. The rain came down in a blinding sheet, turning the canyon floor into a slick, treacherous morass of red mud. Robert Caldwell and his sons stared in stunned confusion, caught in the crossfire. "What is this?" William James bellowed, seeing his brother scrambling down from the rock slide. "It's a trap, but not for us," William yelled back over the din. "Parker's the enemy." Suddenly, Emma rose from her hiding place, stepping into the open. "Father," she cried, her voice cutting through the storm. "Listen to him," Parker lied. Robert Caldwell saw her then standing beside Kai, and his world tilted on its axis. Everything Parker had said, everything he had believed, shattered in that instant. Parker saw her too, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. Ignoring the battle raging around him, he spurred his horse directly toward Emma, his pistol drawn. "You," he screamed, his voice raw with a generation of fury. "You are the cause of all this." Kai moved to intercept him, but two of Parker's men cut him off. Her father and brothers were pinned down by gunfire. Emma was alone with Parker, bearing down on her. She raised her rifle, her hands slick with rain, and fired. The bullet struck Parker's horse, and the animal screamed, collapsing in a heap and pinning Parker's leg beneath it. The storm reached its crescendo. A deafening crack of thunder shook the very ground, and lightning bleached the scene in a brilliant, terrifying flash. In that moment of stark illumination, Emma saw it, a wall of churning brown water, 6 feet high, roaring down the canyon. The storm had triggered a flash flood. The walls, Kai bellowed, fighting off his attackers. "Everyone climb." Panic erupted. Men scrambled for purchase on the slick, muddy canyon walls, friend and foe forgotten in the face of the overwhelming power of nature. Parker, trapped beneath his dead horse, struggled to free his leg, his face a mask of terror as the water surged toward him. Emma hesitated. Every fiber of her being screamed to leave him to his fate. But her father's voice echoed in her mind. "We don't leave anyone behind, Emma. Not even our enemies." Cursing her conscience, she slid down the muddy embankment toward him, Kai and William right behind her. "We have to lift the horse," she yelled over the roar of the flood. As they strained against the dead weight, Parker's eyes locked on Robert Caldwell, who was helping his other sons climb to safety. "It's your fault, Caldwell," Parker shrieked, his voice laced with madness. "All of it, you and your posse of butchers." He fumbled inside his coat, pulling out a small, leather-bound ledger. "I have it all written down. The names of every man in that posse. The ones who shot my father in cold blood." He laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "And do you know who fired the first shot, the one that started it all? Your respected friend, Judge Miller, the man who signed your bounty papers." The revelation struck Robert Caldwell like a physical blow. Judge Miller, the town's most powerful official, a man who had been his ally for years, was the true killer. The water was upon them, icy and powerful, sucking at their legs. With a final desperate heave, they freed Parker's leg. But as William and Kai pulled Emma to safety, Parker made his final move. He lunged not at Emma, but at William, grabbing him and holding a knife to his throat. "Now we all die together, Caldwell," he screamed at Robert. "You'll watch your youngest die just as I watch my father." The rising water swirled around them, threatening to sweep them all away. Emma was faced with an impossible choice. Save William, save Kai, save herself. There was no time. As Parker's attention was fixed on her father, Emma saw her opening. She drew the heavy hunting knife from her belt. She didn't throw it. She lunged forward into the churning water and drove the blade into Parker's side. He gasped, his grip on William loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Kai needed. He pulled William free as Emma shoved Parker away into the main current of the flood. Joshua Parker was swept away, his face a silent scream, his father's ledger clutched in his hand, his quest for revenge consumed by the very storm he had been caught in. Kai grabbed Emma, pulling her from the torrent, just as her strength gave out, and they clung together on the muddy banks as the flash flood raged past, washing the canyon clean of blood and hatred. In the storm's aftermath, the canyon was eerily silent, the air washed clean. Survivors from both sides, Apache warriors, and Parker's few remaining men clung to the slick rock walls, their enmity erased by shared trauma. Agent Harrison and his soldiers, alerted by a prearranged signal from William, arrived not to a battle, but to a rescue operation. Parker's men surrendered without a fight, their stories combined with the evidence William had gathered, painting a damning picture. But the true reckoning was a quieter, more personal affair. Robert Caldwell stood before Kai, the water dripping from his hat, his face a roadmap of grief and regret. 20 years, he said, his voice heavy. I built my life, my reputation on a lie. I hunted your people to atone for a sin I didn't even know I had committed. He looked at his daughter, her hand held firmly in Kai's. I was wrong. About everything. He unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall into the mud. I'm done hunting. In the weeks that followed, the full truth of Parker's vendetta and Judge Miller's corruption came to light. The ledger, miraculously recovered downstream, provided an irrefutable account of the original posse and the subsequent cover-up. Faced with the combined testimony of the Caldwells and Agent Harrison, Judge Miller was arrested, his downfall sending shockwaves through the territory. A new kind of peace began to settle over the land. The alliance forged in the canyon held firm. The Caldwells used their knowledge and influence not to hunt, but to protect. They helped map the boundaries of the Apache's ancestral lands, advocating for their legal protection with a fervor born of atonement. Robert, James, and Thomas began the slow process of rebuilding their ranch, not as an isolated fortress, but as a bridge between two communities. William found his true calling working alongside Agent Harrison to document Apache history and traditions, ensuring their stories would not be erased by the relentless march of progress. He became a voice for understanding in a world accustomed to conflict. Months later, under the vast, patient sky of an Arizona autumn, Emma and Kai stood before a small, newly built cabin that rested on a bluff overlooking both the sprawling Caldwell Ranch and the path leading to the hidden valley. It was a home that belonged to both worlds, just as they did. Emma held her mother's silver locket in one hand and a brilliant sky-blue turquoise stone, a gift from Kai, in the other. They had brought them to a local blacksmith, a man who understood the art of melding disparate elements into a unified whole. Are you sure? Kai asked softly, his hand covering hers. The locket is all you have of her. My mother is not in a piece of silver, Emma said, her gaze steady and clear. She is in my hands when I heal someone, in my heart when I stand up for what is right. She is part of a past that led me to you. She looked at the stone in her other hand. And this is the future. Our future. They belong together. The blacksmith worked his magic, melting the precious silver and carefully setting the vibrant turquoise at its heart. He forged it not into a new piece of jewelry, but into a small, simple emblem, a silver circle representing her world, cradling a turquoise stone representing his. It was a symbol of union, of a love that had not erased their differences, but had celebrated them, forging something stronger and more beautiful than either had been alone. As they rode back to their new home, and the emblem warm in Emma's palm, she looked out over the land. It was the same harsh, beautiful territory she had known all her life, but she saw it now with new eyes. It was no longer a place of division of hunters and hunted of settlers and savages. It was simply a home vast enough for all who were willing to share it, to respect it, and to build a future upon its red earth. The past was a part of her, a scar and a lesson. But the future stretched before them, a wide-open frontier of their own making.